The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over a lively tourist destination nestled in a quaint mountain village. Families meandered between food stalls, while children played near a serene park. Amidst the laughter and chatter, a scruffy stray dog with matted fur and soulful brown eyes cautiously trotted along the cobblestone path. He wore no collar and no owner was in sight, just a frail body that told a tale of survival against all odds. The locals affectionately named him Max. He was a familiar sight, a harmless presence known for wagging his tail at passers-by, hoping for scraps or a gentle pat on the head. However, to a group of visiting tourists, he was merely a nuisance. It began innocently enough, with a few curious glances and children giggling and pointing. Then one young man, emboldened by the laughter of his friends, bent down and picked up a rock. The first throw startled Max, who yelped and backed away, his tail tucked between his legs. A second stone struck him near his ribs, causing him to whimper as he tried to escape the barrage. The group laughed as they hurled more rocks, their mockery drowning out the occasional protests from onlookers who dared not intervene. Max limped toward the park's edge, his eyes darting around for safety. He wasn't just fleeing the stones. He was running from the sting of betrayal by the very humans he had trusted. What no one in that park knew, neither the tourists nor the locals, was that Max was not just a stray. He had once belonged to someone extraordinary, someone who would have moved heaven and earth to protect him. Max's former owner was a retired army general, a man who had witnessed the horrors of war but found his greatest solace in the unwavering loyalty of his dog. Now, miles away, that same man was about to learn what had happened to his faithful companion. Max's story and the events that would soon unfold would remind everyone in that village and beyond of the true meaning of loyalty, justice, and redemption. As night enveloped the village, Max sought refuge beneath a wooden bench in a secluded corner of the park. The cold air stung his wounds, and his breathing was labored. The stars above seemed indifferent to his suffering, twinkling as if nothing had changed in the world. Yet change was on the horizon, closer than anyone anticipated. About 50 miles from the village, retired Army General Thomas Bennett sat in his modest study, a steaming cup of tea in hand. His life had slowed considerably since his days of commanding soldiers. The medals and commendations adorning his walls told the story of a man who had endured unimaginable trials. But the framed photographs on his desk told a different, softer tale. Among them was a picture of Max as a lively pup, his wide eyes brimming with curiosity and a tail that never seemed to stop wagging. Max had been his companion for years, joining him on countless hikes through the countryside. However, when General Bennett fell ill and required prolonged care, he had no choice but to leave Max with a trusted friend in a neighboring village. He hadn't seen Max in over a year, though he often thought of him, wondering if he was thriving as he had hoped. That night, an unexpected call shattered his quiet routine. It was CLA, a local shopkeeper from the village where Max had been staying. Her voice trembled with urgency as she explained, "General, it's Max. I think you should come here. Something terrible happened in the park." Thomas's heart sank. "Max, what do you mean? Is he hurt?" The hesitated. "A group of tourists. Well, they threw rocks at him. He's alive, but he's hurt. He's hiding somewhere in the park." The general didn't need to hear more. He hung up, grabbed his coat, and prepared to leave. His years of military discipline kicked in, his movements precise despite the growing fury in his chest. Max wasn't just a dog to him. He was family. Meanwhile, back in the village, the tourists who had thrown the rocks continued their evening as if nothing had happened. They laughed over drinks at a local tavern, recounting their adventure with no remorse. The locals who had witnessed the incident shook their heads in disgust but felt powerless to confront them. Thomas arrived in the village just before midnight, his presence immediately commanding attention, even in casual clothes. His posture and sharp gaze hinted at his formidable past. He went straight to Soleil's shop, where she met him with a flashlight and a bag of food. He was last seen near the park, she said. I've been looking, but I didn't want to scare him off. Thomas nodded, his face set like stone. Together, they made their way to the park, the quiet of the night amplifying the crunch of their footsteps on the gravel. They called out softly, their voices carrying through the still air. Max, it's me, buddy. It's okay? At first, there was nothing but silence. Then a faint rustle came from beneath the bench. Thomas crouched down, shining his flashlight gently. The sight that greeted him broke his heart. Max lay curled up, his fur matted with dirt and specks of blood. His once bright eyes were dull with pain and fear, but the moment he saw Thomas, something shifted. His tail gave a feeble wag as if to say, I knew you'd come. Thomas reached out slowly, his voice steady and soothing. Hey boy, I'm here now. You're safe. Max whimpered but didn't resist as Thomas wrapped him in a soft blanket. He carried him back to Soleil's shop, where they cleaned his wounds and gave him warm food. As Max drifted off to sleep, his head resting on Thomas's lap, the general's mind raced. This wasn't just a random act of cruelty. It was an attack on a creature who embodied loyalty and love. Thomas wasn't the kind of man to let something like that go unanswered. The next morning, word of Thomas's arrival spread quickly through the village. The tourists, now sober and slightly nervous, began to hear whispers of the retired army general who had come for his dog. Their bravado wavered, but they dismissed the concerns with smug confidence. What's he going to do? It's just a dog, one of them sneered. But they underestimated Thomas Bennett. By mid-morning, he had spoken to every witness in the park and gathered enough details to identify the perpetrators with military precision. He coordinated with local authorities, ensuring that justice would be served. However, for Thomas, this was about more than punishment. It was about redemption. He wanted the tourists to understand the weight of their actions, to face the pain they had inflicted, and to grow from it. Thus, he began to formulate a plan, one that would leave a lasting impression not just on them but on the entire village. The morning sunlight filtered through the trees as Thomas stepped out of Say's shop, Max resting inside on a soft bed. Though Max was still weak, there was a noticeable spark in his eyes that hadn't been there the night before. The villagers, curious about Thomas's presence, gathered quietly nearby, watching the general with a mix of awe and apprehension. Thomas addressed them with calm authority. I've identified the people responsible for harming Max, but this isn't just about them. It's about us as a community. We can't allow cruelty like this to go unchecked. Not here, not anywhere. The crowd murmured in agreement. Many villagers felt ashamed that no one had stepped in to stop the incident. It wasn't just the tourists who needed to learn a lesson. It was everyone who had witnessed the cruelty and turned a blind eye. That afternoon, Thomas set his plan into motion. He arranged a meeting with the village mayor and the local constable, laying out his proposal. It wasn't just about arresting the tourists. It was about creating an opportunity for education and accountability. The mayor, a pragmatic man who respected Thomas's reputation, agreed. Meanwhile, Thomas paid a visit to the tavern where the tourists were staying. The atmosphere shifted the moment he walked in. His presence was magnetic, his gaze sharp enough to cut through the air. The group of 4 men and 2 women who had tormented Max sat at a corner table, their laughter faltering as they noticed him. Thomas approached them without hesitation. You must be the ones I've been looking for. One of the men, tall and broad-shouldered, leaned back in his chair with forced bravado. And who's asking? Thomas Bennett, he replied simply, his voice steady. Retired general and the owner of the dog you hurt. The room fell silent. A waitress froze mid-step, her tray trembling slightly in her hands. The tourists exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier confidence beginning to wane. We didn't know it was your dog, one of the women said defensively. That's not the point, Thomas replied, his tone calm but unyielding. It doesn't matter whose dog it was. What matters is that you thought it was acceptable to harm an innocent creature. That speaks to your character, or lack thereof. The tall man smirked, trying to reclaim some control. Look, it's just a dog. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? Thomas leaned in slightly, his eyes locking onto the man's. It's never just a dog. It's about respect for life, for others, and for yourself. If you can't understand that, then I'll make sure you do. Before the man could respond, Thomas straightened up and stepped back. You have an opportunity here. You can face the consequences of your actions the easy way, or you can do it the hard way. But either way, you will face them. With that, he turned and left, leaving the tourists to stew in their unease. That evening, the village square was transformed, lanterns were strung up, and chairs were arranged in a semicircle around a small stage. News of Thomas's initiative had spread, and nearly everyone in the village had gathered to see what would happen. The tourists arrived reluctantly, escorted by the constable. They looked nervous but defiant, clearly unsure of what to expect. Thomas stepped onto the stage, his commanding presence silencing the murmurs of the crowd. Thank you all for being here tonight. This isn't about punishment. It's about understanding, about looking at ourselves and asking what kind of people we want to be. He gestured to a screen set up beside him. With a nod, CLA, who was operating the projector, began a slideshow of photographs. Each image told a story. Dogs and other animals rescued from neglect and abuse. Their injuries and scars a stark reminder of human cruelty. The audience gasped at the sight of some images, their discomfort palpable. This is what happens when we forget our humanity, Thomas said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. When we treat life as disposable, when we fail to stand up for what's right. He paused, letting his words sink in, then returned to the tourists. You've seen the consequences of actions like yours, but it doesn't have to end there. You have the chance to make it right. The tall man from the tavern scoffed. And how exactly do you expect us to do that? Thomas smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it. You're going to spend the next 2 weeks helping this community rebuild its animal shelter. You'll care for the creatures you once thought of as insignificant. And in the process, you might just learn something about yourselves. The tourists exchanged incredulous looks. You can't force us to do that, one of the women protested. Thomas raised an eyebrow. You're right, I can't force you. But if you refuse, I'll ensure that the authorities back home know exactly what kind of people you are. Trust me, that will follow you for a long time. The weight of his words hung in the air. Slowly, the tourists nodded, their resistance crumbling under the combined pressure of Thomas's authority and their own guilt. The next morning, the tourists gathered reluctantly at the village's animal shelter. It was a modest building in dire need of repairs. Fences broken, kennels rusted, and supplies scattered in disarray. The faint smell of hay and disinfectant lingered in the air, mingling with the soft barks and whimpers of the shelter's residents. Thomas stood waiting for them, arms crossed, with CLA and a few volunteers by his side. Well, Thomas said, his voice firm but measured, this is where you'll be working. 2 weeks from dawn until dusk, you'll clean, repair, and feed the animals. You'll learn what it means to care for lives you've taken for granted. The group exchanged glances, their earlier defiance replaced by discomfort and unease. The tall man, who had been the most vocal the previous evening, muttered under his breath, We're not exactly handy. Sir stepped forward, her warm but no-nonsense demeanor cutting through their hesitance. Good thing we're here to teach you. Grab some gloves and follow me. Time to get started. The tourists shuffled behind CLA as she led them toward the storage area, where brooms, shovels, and other cleaning tools awaited. Thomas watched them go, his expression unreadable. Beside him, a volunteer named Jack chuckled softly. Think they'll last 2 days. Ecas. Thomas's lips twitched in what might have been a faint smile. They'll last. Whether they change is up to them. The first day was grueling. The tourists were tasked with cleaning the kennels and feeding the animals, a process far messier and more time-consuming than they had anticipated. Scylla kept a close eye on them, stepping in to correct sloppy work or show them how to handle the animals safely. Despite their grumbles and complaints, The tourists gradually fell into a rhythm, the initial awkwardness of the task giving way to begrudging effort. By midday, the group gathered under a shady tree for a short break, their faces flushed from the sun, their clothes streaked with dirt and sweat. A small terrier approached one of the women, tail wagging hesitantly. She froze, unsure of how to react. "It's okay," CLA encouraged, kneeling beside the dog. "He's just saying hello. Hold out your hand so he can sniff it." The woman hesitated but eventually extended her hand. The terrier sniffed it cautiously before giving a tentative lick. A small, almost imperceptible smile flickered across her face. "I didn't think they'd be this gentle. They're like people," CLA said. "You show them kindness, and they'll give it back tenfold." That evening, Thomas reviewed the day's progress with CLA and Jack. The tourists had cleaned half the kennels, repaired a section of the fencing, and started organizing the shelter's cluttered storage area. It was far from perfect, but it was a start. "They're rough around the edges," CLA admitted, sipping a cup of tea, "but I think there's hope for a few of them." Jack snorted. "You're being generous. The big guy, what's his name? Derek. He spent more time complaining than working." Thomas leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. "People don't change overnight, but they do change when they're shown the right path." As they spoke, Max limped into the room, his gait still stiff but improving. He padded over to Thomas, resting his head on the man's knee. Thomas scratched behind Max's ears absent-mindedly, his focus on the conversation. "And if they don't change?" Jack asked, his tone skeptical. Thomas's hand stilled. "Then at least we'll know we gave them the chance." Over the next few days, small cracks began to form in the tourists' defenses. The tall man, Derek, who had been the most resistant, found himself paired with Jack to fix the broken fences. Though he grumbled about the task, he listened carefully as Jack showed him how to measure and cut the planks. By the end of the day, Derek stood back, wiping sweat from his brow as he surveyed the newly repaired section of fencing. "Not bad," Jack said grudgingly. "Might even hold up in a storm." Derek managed a sheepish grin. "Guess I've got a knack for this after all." Meanwhile, the woman who had hesitated with the terrier, a quiet redhead named Lisa, seemed to grow more comfortable around the animals. She volunteered to help feed the puppies, spending her breaks sitting in their pen and letting them climb into her lap. By the end of the week, one of the puppies had grown particularly attached to her, following her around wherever she went. The villagers, initially skeptical of Thomas's plan, began to notice the changes. Tourists who had once been seen as threats were now repairing fences, organizing supplies, and helping the shelter run more smoothly than it had in years. Slowly but surely, the hostility that had hung over the village began to lift. On the 7th day, Thomas gathered the group for a meeting. The tourists sat on overturned crates, their postures less defensive than before. "You've made progress," Thomas said. "But this isn't just about fixing fences or cleaning kennels. It's about understanding what brought you here in the first place." The group was silent, their expressions thoughtful. For the first time, Derek spoke without sarcasm. "We acted like idiots. No excuses for it, but I guess we're trying to make it right." Thomas nodded, his expression softening. "That's all anyone can ask for." The next phase of the tourists' rehabilitation brought unexpected challenges. While their work had improved, tensions still simmered beneath the surface. Derek, despite his newfound competence with tools, remained quick to snap at others when frustrated. Lisa's growing bond with the animals earned her teasing from another member of the group, a sharp-tongued woman named Karen, who often questioned why Lisa spent so much time with the dogs instead of focusing on the real work. It wasn't long before the friction boiled over. One afternoon, as Derek struggled to hammer in a stubborn nail for a new kennel frame, Karen passed by carrying a bucket of water. "Maybe if you hit the nail instead of the wood, it would actually go in," she quipped. Derek straightened his jaw, tightening. "You want to try? Be my guest. Unlike you, I know my limits. I stick to what I'm good at, like keeping things clean, which is more than I can say for your sloppy work." Before Derek could respond, Lisa intervened, stepping between them. Enough. We're all tired, but snapping at each other isn't helping. Karen rolled her eyes. Oh, of course, Saint Lisa, defender of puppies and people. What would we do without you? Lisa's cheeks reddened, but she didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she turned to Derek. Come on, let's finish this so we can call it a day. Karen muttered something under her breath as she walked away, leaving Derek and Lisa to exchange weary glances. She's been like that since day one, Derek grumbled. Don't know why she even bothers. Maybe because she's trying in.